Alright everybody, so this is the list that I'm bringing tomorrow to the GT. First off, our Warlord, Shadow Sun. The reason why she's in the list is because we do not leave home without her if we are running 2 or more of these guys, Hammerheads. The reason why is because of one of her auras, reroll 1s to hit. So because of the Hammerhead special rule, they get +1 to hit against monsters and vehicles. And because our army rule is +1 ballistic skill for being guided, those two stack, meaning that these guys, all 3 of them, the 2 Ions and Rail, will be hitting on 2s, which is really critical to have the reroll 1s as well, making sure that we are as efficient as possible into our harder hitting targets. Now, I know many people have been running triple Ion. I've found that the Railgun, at least one, coming from Strat Reserve, has been really powerful. In our local meta, we still see a lot of things like Granites with Canis Rex, or Greater Demons, or a Land Greater Redeemer is really the perfect target for it. And I've just found that being able to bring it off Strat Reserve and pick out its ideal target has been really critical in a lot of those matchups. Yeah, I usually get a ton of value out of them. Next, so this little package right here of these 5 units, the 3 stealth suits and 2 piranhas, this is my trash. Now, with the stealth suits, usually I do not forward deploy them. 1 unit typically is on my home field, ready to swing out on either of the long angles to guide for something. The other unit is usually near my natural expansion objective. Again, just ready to do a secondary like cleanse or containment, also screen a little bit. And the last unit is usually a swingman. Now, usually this unit is more central to my army, but sometimes what I'll do is if I lose these 2 guys too early, and I still need to screen, for my bigger units like my Hammerheads or Riptides in front of them, I might throw that unit out early if I really am in a pinch. But that is typically the job of the Piranhas. Now, the reason I really like these guys is they have a great combination of natural speed, which I find has been really powerful in Pry Nexus, as well as utility, right? So they can tag other units or other opponents, rhinos or immolators. The Battle Shock test is cute. Every once in a while, it'll turn off a unit's ability to reroll a hit or reroll a save, or not pop or popping Armor of Contempt, which can be really helpful. And they also have a couple Seeker Missiles and a Fusion Blaster. Every once in a while, their damage pops off, but most of the time, I'm relying on them for forward screening, being able to proc the full hit reroll strat, because typically it requires a unit from my opponent's army that is has some decent amount of damage, and also scoring me early secondaries. It's very critical. So these 5 units plus Shadow Sun, I really like this package for playing early game and supporting the rest of the units in my army. One other unit that does that is Pathfinders. I've found them to be absolutely mandatory. Just the reason being is they're just so good into pressure matchups like World Eaters, for example. Orcs you don't see as much, but World Eaters specifically, this unit is absolutely critical for that matchup. Being able to string them across the board, not letting your opponent scout at all. And if you are in one of those pressure matchups, what you can do is you still forward deploy them. Just make sure they're wholly within 5.9 inches of a ruin each model. So that way, if your opponent goes first, you can scout them 7 inches back. That way they're 1.1 inches away from the ruin wall, and your opponent then has to charge through the wall to get you. So you're guaranteed whatever is charging through that wall, you're gonna be able to kill that with the rest of your army. These 3 guys. So I tested a little bit of having 2 Riptides versus 3 Riptides, and I found that Riptides are still an auto-include. The reason being is damage 4 is so good, especially with lethal hits. AP3 damage 4 is just really good. Same thing with like taking out elite targets. There's not many instances of damage 4 in the game, but it is really good into things like Devastator Centurions, which you don't see very often, but can be very, very nice in those matchups, or Locust Heavy Destroyers. Anything that has 3 or 4 wounds really hates Riptides. Same thing with like Death Company Marines, right? -1 damage plus feel no pain. Doesn't matter most of the time. Every single wound that goes through will kill one of them. So being able to ignore the hit roll and having that 4-up invuln, fall back and shoot, I've just found them to be a really good utility unit. I found them to be a linchpin unit for this list specifically. Just adding another element of durability where we typically don't have it, right, with the 4-up invuls. All right, moving over here to our battle line. So we are running 3 battle line units. We have 2 Breacher teams of Cadre Fireblades. 2 is the absolute minimum that I'll run. As I'm sure if you run this unit before, they are absolutely amazing. They're amazing to so many different targets. They punch up super well. They're just really, really good at what they do. And what I found to be really valuable with them is actually saving them for late game. You know, still having them within 18 inches of probably 2 objectives in no man's land to threaten my opponent at all times. But typically I like to wait for the very end game, and when they delete a unit, take an objective, and I do that twice in one turn. Typically that's backbreaking enough for my opponent to not be able to get to where they want to be on the scoreboard. The last unit here that I'm running is an experimental unit. So this is a strike team. I could have run crew carnivores. The reason I ran the strike team instead was because I found that the durability does matter. So, while they're not necessarily a tough unit, having a 4-up save, potentially going to a 3 with cover, and being -1 to wounded shooting means that my opponent can't just throw a wimpy unit at them. So I found that they trade up quite often. They also have a cute little rule where they can make enemy infantry units -1 to hit, which applies to shooting or melee. So this is really my experimental unit. We'll see how they perform. But all in all, I am very happy with this list. I've been working on my Mont'ka list for quite a while now, and I think this is the best one I've put together so far.
What's up, everybody? John here. We are post GT, the 40K Fight Club Open. There was 95 players in attendance, and we ended up going 4-2. We did take top Tau. However, I was hoping to have a better result. To be 100% honest with you, I think there were certainly some mistakes that I made. There were some good plays out there. And what I want to tell you all is what are the things that I did well and I'm going to keep doing? What are some things that I could do better, which certainly there are a few of, and how would I change my list moving forward? So our 6 opponents, we played first round, Eldari, Brian. We ended up winning that game by about 25. I think it was 95-71. Our second game against Tuan was a very close one. It was against Votan, which I hadn't played that matchup very often, and then we played Votan a second time. Day 2, we won that one as well. Day 2, we played Robert, who was playing guard. He had a Storm Sword, which was quite an interesting matchup. We ended up losing a close one, and it really just came down to the secondaries that he drew. He ended up winning by 2 points. Mason, he was playing Awakened Dynasty, which I hadn't played before. He had quite a strong list. He played the matchup super well. We ended up losing that one, I believe 100-70. It was on Purge the Foe. And then our last game was against James, my good buddy. We had a really close one. I believe it was 59-54 to me, but it really could have gone either way in the end. So, what were some things that worked for me? First of all would be tagging with forward deployers. So Piranhas and Pathfinders, for example. I can remember from my game with Votan against Tom, my third game of day 1, and my first game of day 2 against Robert, 2 instances where charging with Piranhas was really strong. So against Votan, I pulled behind enemy lines turn 1, moved up my Piranha 9 inches, scouted him up 9, moved 14, and ended up charging his Sagittar. So I knew he had access to fallback, shoot, and charge, but I wanted him to spend the CP. That Piranha was going to die already, scoring me behind enemy lines, so what I really wanted to do was at least force a little bit more resources out of him. Now, he did not actually end up falling back that turn, so I stayed in combat with him. I hit a Melt to 4 fusion shot into him, and I believe I did 7 damage. I was able to kill that Sagittar that turn, which was really strong. And then against Robert, who ended up taking third with the Storm Sword, I deployed my Piranha in front of the Storm Sword. I ended up getting first turn again, and I needed, I think, a 5-inch charge to charge the Storm Sword. With the idea being it was already in a corner, I could at least stop him for 1 turn from being able to move into the middle of the table with the Storm Sword and activate. And while it was still behind the ruin, hide, my other damage dealers and move them around the table unencumbered without the thought of a Storm Sword potentially one-shotting 2 Riptides and a Devilfish, which he ended up doing later on in that game. So he ended up flubbing in his shooting phase turn 1, and the Piranha ended up surviving, so he was stuck in combat for 2 full turns with the Storm Sword, which really helped me stay competitive in that matchup. The the other unit that was super helpful with tagging things was Pathfinders. So Game 6 against James and CSM Renegade Raiders, he didn't have any infiltrators, so what I did was I waited till the very end to deploy my Pathfinders to wait to see where he was deploying his Rhinos, which he had 3 of, and the Vindicators. He had 2 Vindicators where he was deploying those as well, so that I could line the Pathfinders up 9 inches away, move them up 7, and then make an unfailable charge. So I was able to tag the 2 Rhinos turn 1. Then all I needed to do was put a Piranha on my own expansion objective outside of, he could technically charge me with some of his other units, but really outside of danger from getting taken off the point, so I could at least guarantee myself the first turn of primary, which was really strong. And also just gum him up, not let him stage super effectively on me for that following turn, which gave me a leg up on staging and movement and getting angles on his units when they did start activating. So what I could have done better. So for one of my losses, I certainly could have considered secret missions. I think when you have breachers and a devilfish, it's always a possibility to get those in your opponent's deployment zone, even if you're going first. Something that I just didn't even really think about in the moment, but certainly a consideration I could have made even when going first, because they are -1 to wound. I can put them, in a corner, let's say, of my opponent's deployment zone. So it certainly was, a possibility. The other thing is something I'm usually pretty good at, but after losing my first game of the day 2, I had, my head just wasn't in it as it usually was. I was still kind of processing what happened and how I could have played better, but it simply was confirming rules with my opponent before rolling dice. So I killed a Lich Guard unit, and there was just a character left in Overlord, so I thought to myself, okay, this guy certainly doesn't have a good profile into Riptides. I ended up charging the Riptide in. Come to find out, his profile is 5 attacks, strength 12, AP 3, 3 damage. I failed my 3 4-ups and I ended up taking 9 damage, right? So that was really silly. I was already behind in that matchup, but that kind of just sealed the deal for me, sadly. So all I really had to do was ask my opponent, hey, what's this guy's melee like? I really just didn't want my my breachers who were right in front of him to get charged and stuck for a turn. So that was just my mistake. The next thing that I would highly suggest is, it's my golden rule, which is play with a list that you're most comfortable with, as opposed to playing with, what might be the most optimized list into the field. Now, I'm not claiming to say that this was the most optimized list in the field, but it was what I believe to be the most optimized list in the field, and I only had one practice game in with it. Certainly, the other games that I played, there were 2 or 3 units different, so it wasn't a huge departure from what I've been playing. But I think that as far as like deployment is concerned and picking the right targets, I hadn't fully played with that, with that conglomeration of units, right? And so I think that was a mistake by me. Was I should have just played with what I was most comfortable with, as opposed to trying to game what the best list was into the meta. Lastly, I want to talk about picking the right targets. So there was against the Lich Guard brick, they have a 4-up invul. They're -1 to wound if my strength is higher than their toughness. So it meant that all my Riptides and Iron Hammerheads were wounding on 4s. And then he had 4-ups. And after thinking through that matchup again, I really should have put just a Breacher unit into that unit, maybe a Riptide, and I probably would have been fine. And instead I put 2 Riptides and an Iron Hammerhead into it, and I think after those 3 activations, I had only killed 3 Lich Guard after he spent a CP to revive 3, 4, 5 of them. So picking the right targets and being most efficient is also something that I could have done a little bit better. Now, how I would change the list. So I think one thing that it was missing, although I had the Riptide coming from reserves, was some board presence towards more of the middle of the table. Most of my units, they kind of want to fan out as opposed to like going towards the middle. Maybe it would be a Hammerhead in some cases after it's used its Seeker Missiles just to force something out for my opponent. So what I would do is I would drop a Hammerhead, 1 Riptide, because I think Hammerhead and Riptide number 3 are each a little bit less efficient than the first two, and I would drop that Strike Team, which was perfectly fine for me. It held, definitely scored me some primary, certainly did some screening, but I think the Breacher and Cadre Fireblade into the field, and which is what I've been using previously, is really, really strong in this meta. It's probably one of our best units, especially turns 4 and 5. It doesn't need, it still has Assault, right? So it can still benefit from the auto advance 6 and do a lot of damage to the end of the game. And the other addition is the Sunforge unit with a Cold Star, who also has Assault late game. Just having a unit that your opponent has to respect, it adjusts how they're moving and staging their units, because at any moment I can Rapid Ingress and move the Cold Star unit 18 inches, can really change and alter my opponent's game plan. So that's the full breakdown. All in all, it was an amazing tournament. If you ever have a chance to come to one of these tournaments, the organizer, Brandon Roddy, does an amazing job. Everyone is super chill, and we always have good games. So certainly come by if you can. Please let me know what you think of the short form style of this tournament review. My thought process was I wanted to keep it similar to the last two videos, short and sweet, just give you the meat of the learnings that I had. And yeah, if this is something that you would like me to continue doing, this style of video, please let me know in the comments down below. If you would appreciate something more in depth, I can certainly do that as well, but I won't know unless you tell me. So hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.